Hi guys, and welcome. Um, First of all, apologies. I'm not with you in the flesh for reasons that are slightly complicated. For this one random week, I cannot be with you. So, we're trialing an experiment. I'm going to video this lecture. Well, that's you're watching it, so I will have done it by the time you sit down and watch this. And there are advantages to doing it this way and disadvantages. I would appreciate your feedback afterwards on whether this type of presentation works for you. I'll stress that we're not actually planning to use it, but it's sometimes good in an emergency backstop situation. Anyhow, again, welcome. New term and a new unit, and we're going to talk about chromosomes, genes, and DNA in this first lecture. And I'd like to start by thinking about this word nucleus, because in our studies we've used it quite a lot, haven't we? So, not quite the last lecture, but recently in the last term, we looked at solar system formation and how the sun became effectively a nucleus and a accreting centre. And in fact, how that same pattern was repeated in the orbital tracks which now correspond to our planets. So, in the same way the sun accreted and became a nucleus, in that case of the whole solar system, planets did also accrete and become their own little nucleus to that part of the solar system. Okay, so that's one use of the word and the concept of nucleus that you've already met in science. Let's look at another one. We talked about tectonics in the last couple of weeks of last semester and how the Earth has a core, a centre, which is powering all sorts of interesting things. And I'm sure that you enjoyed the homework on that. Homework, by the way, in this context, I'm not going to mark that homework in this session. When I see you next week, we'll organise how we're going to do that. So there's a second use of the concept of nucleus, even if we call it a core. Another idea of nucleus was in the nuclear atom. Atoms have, this is the nucleus of an atom. It has protons, neutrons, with the electrons around the outside. So there's three different uses of this term, or certainly this concept. Today, however, we're going to look at a different type of nucleus. Science is always interesting, I think. It's like a journey, and in our understanding of nucleus and cores, our journey is leading actually to biology. But before we actually get to any biology, you know that I like to use the concise Oxford Dictionary. In this case, I actually haven't. The definition of a nucleus is a central or fundamental part or thing around which others are grouped. It's also called a core. And I think for all of these, you can see that there's a central thing and other things are grouped around it. What we're going to do now is think about biology. But just before we do, this is something which is not included in this lecture. I put this slide up because it can be confusing and it seems better to actually physically kick it out. This lecture and your syllabus is not about prokaryotic cells. They are not covered in this course. Sort of things we're thinking about might look like this. They can be bacteria. They're also the pretty much the basis of the archaea, those first life forms that evolved on this planet. You remember at the end of last term, we talked about the original reducing oceans and how creatures, which may or may not have looked like this, but certainly would be classed as the archaea, actually converted the CO2 into oxygen using sunlight and, bang. So, this is what is not included in this lecture and not in the syllabus. For comparison, because it's always interesting, these archaea lack a nucleus, the thing we were just talking about. They don't have one. Their genetic material, their DNA, is in a region called the nucleoid, which would you believe is the space, or like in the centre, but it's not contracted and pulled together. And it's a single, huge, long, circular chromosome. I understand you don't know what that means at the moment, but you will, hopefully anyway, by the end of this lecture. These prokaryotic cells are significantly smaller than the eukaryotic cells that we're dealing with, and they typically possess a cell wall, something to keep the outside, a plasma membrane, which is somewhere around the middle, ribosomes, and cytoplasm. They may also have additional structures like a flagella, for instance, which they whip around and it allows them to move. But that is not what we're talking about in this lecture. Okay, let's move on to what we are talking about. So we're talking about eukaryotic cells, and they include plant cells. Again, last year I certainly remember us learning about leaves and how plants work. This is a plant cell. It does have a nucleus where it holds its genetic material. That's important to remember because it's a commonality. It has other bits and pieces. We're not going to go through it again. Things like mitochondria, bit where it gets its power from. Vacuoles, they're basically storage places to put water if you're a plant or nutrients. And because it's a plant, that is, non-plant eukaryotic cells do not have this. You have chloroplasts, which are the bit of the plant that contains chlorophyll, which traps light and uses that energy to power the chemistry within. Plant cells are one type of eukaryotic cell, but we're going to look at animal cells. So humans typically have 23 pairs of chromosomes. That means they've got a total of 46 chromosomes. For clarity, usually the number of chromosomes an organism has is spoken in pairs. So humans have 46, so they have 23 pairs. The first 22 of those chromosomes are called autosomes. And the last pair are the sex chromosomes, the things that determine whether you're a boy or whether you're a girl. I know that's a very shuttered view of gender, and I'm not implying anything by that. It's simply that in terms of the human body, oh goodness, how do I say this? Mostly, whether you are a boy or a girl, male or female, is determined by your body. What genitalia do I have? Do I have mammary glands? Yeah, embarrassed. But you see what I'm saying? Now, we understand that maybe gender is slightly more nuanced than that. Now, apart from the very rare people, and there are such people, who have the sexual organs of both sexes in their body or parts of, that's extremely rare. Mostly the Other gender descriptions, yeah, and there are many of them, are to do with the brain rather than the body. Now, that's arguable, and you could argue with me, and that's fine. But in this course, I'm sticking with male and female simply because it's a little complicated to go anywhere else with this. Okay. Now, remember what I was talking about when I said that these chromosomes actually reproduce themselves and reproduce the cells and stuff like that. These are human chromosomes. And can you see they look a little bit like X's? It's because the chromosome here makes a duplicate of itself, and they stay bonded together through the middle section until it's time for the cells to divide. And then these chromosomes divide, and one of them ends up in the new cell and one of them stays in the old cell. And it's not trivial that this routine, and for the body it is routine, this routine thing is accurate, very, very accurate. You hardly ever get a mistake. So here we are. Here's our genes. So this is a sort of diagram or an illustration of that. And you can see that all of this is like DNA all wound round each other and inside and outside. And if you unravel it like that, you eventually get the long, hugely long DNA strand that's all the way here, and then it's raveled around itself and stuff like that. Incredible amount of information can be physically stored in chromosomes and genes. This is another way of expressing that, and it's the diagram that your textbook has. These coloured stripes represent a gene. And so remember, a gene is multiple base pairs with its phosphate and sugar frame. That's one gene. And remember, chromosomes have many, many, many genes. So, chromosome may have hundreds of genes, and genes are made up of very long chains of nitrogen base pairs within that double helix structure. And the gene sequence, you don't usually draw it like this. You can produce this from a computer, but even so, it's still quite cumbersome. Usually, they're described by just the initial of the nitrogen base in the base pairs. Guanine, adenine, anyway, tyrosine, the ones we talked about earlier. Different genes are arranged differently to make up each chromosome. So to give you an indication, humans, we'll get to us in a moment, we have 43 pairs. Chromosome 15 has about 600 different genes in it. Chromosome 1 has about 2,000. Now, there's a whole area here, and at the moment, I'm deliberately just, what's that word, stepping lightly. What sorts of things do these genes control? They probably control whether your eyes are brown or blue. They probably control whether in your... I had a good friend. I know that he's still well, but it's I knew him in the UK. Don't know whether I should tell you this. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't actually. Anyway, his name is Rowan, and we did lots of stuff together when we were young. And at the age of about 28, 29, he just got married, or married a year or two, and he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And basically, he's been in a wheelchair deteriorating ever since. The fight is daily, and it's horrible, and I genuinely hope that nobody I know would ever get something like that. or multineurone disease or whatever. But these are genetic diseases and they're controlled by the genes you have. Anyway, let's move on. So, human beings, as we've already said, have genes, have chromosomes, and here are pictures: chromosome 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on and on. Right. So, this is a picture of a human being, I suppose. There's 23 pairs of chromosomes. Typically, that's what humans have, which means 46 chromosomes in all. Why typically? Well, not all people are the same. Some of us, I don't mean me, I mean all of us are different from, if there's another Simon Watts in the world, I should be very sad because the world is then labouring under a double burden. But still, nonetheless, we're all different. But some of us are different at these levels. Some people, for instance, have a third sex chromosome. If you're unlucky enough to have a third sex chromosome, unfortunately, it's likely to be very bad for you. Most of those people with three are violent, very violent criminals, and they do terrible things. And so that probably is not going to be very good for your life. But most of us have 23 pairs, 46. And the thing to note is that these have been arranged in order of length. It's like a cut and paste. So they're not actually, you know what it looks like. It's a DNA molecule. So chromosome 1 is the longest, and down at the other end, it's the shortest. So there we are. That's where your progression is. The sex chromosomes are slightly different, and they're at the end. Okay, what I need else to tell you. Because all chromosomes make copies of themselves, they often look like these sort of crosses. These pairs, so chromosome 1 and 2, are of the same type. That's why they're together. Likewise 2, likewise 3. Oh, we're at the end. Okay, so let's try all this and see how it goes. And I'll be interested to know what you think of it at the end. Oh, no, before we do that, homework. Please complete section 7.1, questions 1 to 4 to your homework. But before you go, I want to think a little bit about twins. Now, one of them has blue eyes, one of them doesn't. This pair of girls are also twins. This one has what I would call red hair, and this one has a different hair. These actually are my daughters, Ruth and Rebecca. Now, they're both blue-eyed, and their hair is much of the same type, sort of blue. So the question I want to talk about at the beginning of the next lecture is, how is it possible with twins to have, for instance, different eye colours or different hair colours? Because actually, guys, the genes are all there. Anyway, that's the question. Okay. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.